All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of Senate Committee on Revenue and Economic Development. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Senator Buck. Here. Senator Dunyate. Senator Cancer. Here. Senator Spearman. Here. Chair Neal.
Here. Please mark Senator Dunyate present as he arrives. I would like to welcome the audience members here in Carson City, and if there's any in Las Vegas as well, watching and listening over the internet. If you have not done so already, please mute all of your electronic devices. Today, we're going to have a quick presentation from the transportation network companies, or the Nevada Transportation Authority, under the Department of Business and Industry, before we hear our first bill, which is SB 125. The reason why we're doing that is because typically the jurisdiction of the TNC is not revenue. And so we are having a presentation first. I'm going to call Director Reynolds to the table. And so we have two bills today. It'll be SB 125 first and then SB 140. When you're ready, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair Neal. Terry Reynolds, Director for the Department of Business Industry. For the record, we're going to have a brief presentation overview of the Nevada Transportation Authority. To my right is the Chair of the NTA, Ms. Dawn Gibbons, and also at the Sawyer Building, at the podium there, is Mr. Todd Parks. He's our Chief of Enforcement. I'm going to introduce the NTA and then turn it over to Mr. Parks and to Chair Gibbons to go through the presentation. But prior to that, I want to make a couple comments. Most everybody here is very familiar with transportation issues in the state of Nevada, especially in Clark County. We have the Taxi Authority, who handles just taxis within Clark County, and the NTA basically handles everything else from that perspective. They handle charter buses, limos, household good movers, tow cars, scenic tours, non-emergency medical transfers, employer, van pools. Now, those are the ones that are contracted out for that. Airport transfer services, special services, warehouse permits, transportation network companies, and autonomous vehicles statewide, as well as taxi cabs outside of Clark County. So the statutes that they deal with are 706, which is motor carriers, 706A, which is transportation network companies, 706B, which is autonomous vehicles, and then under the NAC, the corresponding Nevada Administrative Code, 706 for motor carriers, 706A for TNCs, and 706B for autonomous vehicles. NRS 712, which is household good storage and movers, and CFR 49, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, because several of the entities that they regulate are covered under the federal CFRs. I would point out, too, that for movers, it's only within the state of Nevada, so they don't do intercontinental movers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Parks and Ms. Gibbons. I'd like to say anything, and I'm going to be, hopefully I can get it right, I'm going to be manning the PowerPoint.
Well, thank you for this opportunity to let me come and speak about our agency. I love this agency, and it's a growing agency, and it's just something that's dear to my heart. Our NTA staffing, we have 3 paid commissioners, a deputy commissioner, and I'd like to just say she was supposed to be here today, but had an emergency in her family and won't be able to make it, and our condolences go out to her. We have 18 enforcement officers. That includes me. And we have 6 compliance auditor investigators, 3 application managers, which are all CPAs. And we'll talk a little bit about what a CPCN is, but they're the ones that go over the applications and make sure that everything's looking good, at least for their part of the application process. We have 3 legal staff, 6 administrative staff, 1 IT person, which is 41 total people. The interesting thing is with 41 people, we're covering the whole state. And Nevada continues to grow, and it's getting larger all the time. And I'm very impressed with the people that we have in our agency because they do an outstanding job with just the 41 people that we have. The motor carriers that we have, 21 airport transport services. That means the per capita they can charge per person. We have 113 charter buses, 46 charter limousines, 119 consent-only tows, 9 contract carriers, 1 horse-drawn vehicle, and you'll be happy to know they are in compliance. I double-checked that before I came here today. And 85 non-consent and consent tows, 7 non-emergency medical transport people, 23 special services, 7 taxis, 16 scenic tours, and 7 transportation network companies, and I'll give you who those are here in another slide. I think the important thing here is 8,438 non-TNC drivers. That's an approximate number because it's an ongoing fluid number of people that are the non-TNC drivers. But we have 31,414 TNC drivers, and that's as of February of this year. Large number of drivers we have that we oversee. The passenger safety is our first priority. We talk about the traveling public. I can tell you, coming from another state, prior to coming here, I had no idea that the regulations were so strict and so good to try to take care of the traveling public and make sure that they are safe. One of the things we do is we process driver permits for all the industry except for the TNCs, tow carriers, and the household good movers, and the employee van pool companies. We also process the new carrier applications, and I talked about our CPAs that are heavily involved in that aspect of it. We conduct administrative and enforcement hearings. When we have citations, obviously, we take them in front of into a hearing, and a commissioner hears them. And then later on at the agenda, which happens basically once a month, they all 3 vote on that specific topic and make sure that everybody agrees with the findings on that hearing. We have 3 commissioners that preside over that, and there's approximately 1,000 cases a year that they hear. We also do audits and inspect existing carriers. The investigators enforce the Nevada laws and regulations as well as the federal regulations that we've adopted. We ensure the industry is providing the safest transportation to the passengers. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some insurances, and that's kind of the nut and bolts of one of the things that we do. We also coordinate with federal, state, and local agencies. I've made it a big effort of mine to reach out to the local agencies around here, and I know that there's very good relationships up north with the NTA, with outside agencies. A lot of these cases just seem to overlap into other areas, and we're just a small part of it. Not too long ago, there was a homicide down here that happened at a tow carrier yard. The Metro Department reached out to us, and we were able to assist them with some of those items. We want to improve our agency efficiency and the services that we provide. And as I said earlier, it's a growing state, and so it's something that we strive to do on a daily basis. We continue to adapt and evolve rapidly in this market. So on the next slide, fully regulated or partially regulated. Basically, the difference is fully regulated, we're looking at the financial end of things. And on the partially regulated, we're not looking on the financial end of it. We definitely are trying to make sure that both fully and partially regulated are safe. You can see underneath each topic the the carriers that fall underneath each one of those. The TNCs, I guess I would consider those partially regulated. I've put down the list of TNC operators that we have in the state of Nevada. And then the AVNC, that's the Autonomous Vehicles Network Companies. None of them yet have filed for CPCN, but we all know that that's coming, and there's a lot of things in the works to get those people up and running. So the TNC regulations that we deal with, regulatory compliance reviews or audits, those are done twice a year. They take about 5% of randomly selected drivers, and we do these audits. We're also checking the vehicles and the drivers as well. The TNC obligations to the NTA regulations, they have to yearly submit a gross operating revenue, their regulatory assessment fee. They have to notify us of any crashes involving their drivers or autonomous vehicles, and they must provide the proof of insurance with proper coverage limits. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those limits here in a minute. On the next slide, the most common TNC violations that we find. Now, if you look, the top two are just NRS 706s. And if you remember back to one of the earlier slides, the 706As are what regulates the TNCs. But my staff, we deal with a lot of people that are operating as a carrier, whether it's passenger transportation, tow company, household goods, that are supposed to have a CPCN, but they don't. And so that's one of the big violations that we find a lot of. The 706-476, that is the statute that gives us the ability to impound somebody's vehicle. In fact, it's very specific, and it uses the word must impound on these certain violations. So we really don't have any room to say, okay, we're not going to give you, or we're not going to impound your vehicle this time. The statute's very clear that we must impound the vehicle. On the 706A280, that's a prohibited acts. A lot of times when we are dealing with TNC violators that are working off of the application, we issue that citation, but that citation does not have a fine attached to it. The 706A160 and the 706A180, both of those statutes are used basically during the audits, and our compliance team goes through the audits, the drivers and the vehicles, and where it says 6 items for the drivers and 1 item for the vehicles. That's on the attachment that I gave to you at the top. There's some bullet points. It's those things that we are looking at during those audits, and that's what it means. For the drivers, 6 of those bullet points pertain specifically to the drivers. 1 of those things is specific to the vehicles. So my group, my enforcement guys, we do a lot of sting operations, and that's one of our big events on a weekly basis. What happens is, well, recently we've heard that there's one group out here, as many as 40 illegal operators that have kind of gotten together, and they're becoming very organized. They are working out at the airport quite a bit. We have a lot of complaints coming from the airport about the aggressive drivers out there trying to get rides. This group of people, they hold pre-shift briefings. They run counter surveillance on my guys. They have photographed my guys at gas stations and at times that they're doing impounds. This is big business for them. We've heard maybe up to $2,000 or $3,000 a night that some of these people are making. And they'll also have in their pre-shift briefing, they'll talk about which driver may have cocaine. So if a passenger shows up and they want cocaine, they'll steer them to that driver. Or if somebody wants a prostitute, they'll steer them towards that driver, or heroin, or whatever it is. They're becoming very, very sophisticated, and it's made our job more difficult. We do a really good job of getting them shoved out from the airport area, but then they're just out running around in the hotels and these large events. It's incredible how many people, how many illegal drivers show up to these large events like the Raider games or the concerts or something like that. It's big business, and they're making a lot of money doing this. And these type of people are the ones that we're finding a lot of drugs and weapons on. So talking specifically about TNCs, op application rides. So most of us know about Uber and Lyft. I have the app on my phone. When a driver does not want to or wants to give a ride for cash and they're not on the application, it creates a very big problem. So my guys go out, they work in plain clothes, and they'll stand around in the TNC areas or in the valet areas and wait to be solicited by a driver for a cash ride. The reason the drivers are doing the cash rides is they make money. They don't have to pay money to the TNC company that they're working for. And so if they want to charge a $20 ride, they get all $20 of that. A lot of times they'll ask us if we're a cop or if we're a policeman, and we say no. And they ask us if we have the app, and we say no. My wife will be mad if I have that kind of an application on my phone, or whatever excuse we use. And then if they offer to give us a ride for cash, that's when we will identify ourselves as police officers that we work for the state or the NTA. Usually when we say that we are police officers, they just kind of drop their head and they know they've been caught. It is getting a little bit more dicey these days. We have more people that are not wanting to comply. And I think as times get more difficult, people are fighting for that cash. That's probably going to continue. But anyway, in the end, the investigators will impound the vehicle under 706-476, and the drivers, for the driver not having a CPCN. And the reason is that it requires $1.5 million of insurance for them to be doing commercial passenger transportation. And I really want to talk about those insurances on the next slide because they're really important to what we do. And the top portion, you can read through those. Obviously, it's a lot of money to insure these vehicles. Down at the bottom under the TNC, the passenger in car providing a ride, that person, that driver is supposed to have $1.5 million of insurance. And the reason it's important is if you or your loved one get into a TNC vehicle, they get into a crash and you get hurt or you lose your life or a loved one's life, the TNC company is going to say, look, you were providing a ride not on our app that you're supposed to be on. The car insurance company that driver has is normal car insurance like what you or I would have on our vehicles, but we're providing a commercial transportation at that point, so the insurance company is probably not going to pay for those injuries either, and that leaves the driver, or I'm sorry, that leaves the passenger out in the cold, not being able to pay for their injuries and their losses. So that's why it's so important for drivers and companies to have a CPCN, or in the TNC case, the permit that allows them to operate in our state. And I think that pretty much covers the things that I want to visit about. If Chair Gibbons has more to add.
Hi, Dawn Gibbons for the record, and Senator Neal.
Go ahead.
Do you have any questions?
Members, do you have any questions on this presentation? Senator Spearman.
Thank you. And I guess it may have been answered. So the sting occurs with law enforcement?
Yes, Todd Park for the record. Yes, the stings, that's my group of people. They're all police officers, at least Category 2. Most of us are Category 1 police officers, but yes, those are done by law enforcement officers.
And some of the activity, well, a couple of things of the activity that you mentioned that are occurring are specifically illegal, and they're just kind of popping up. Are these pop-up kind of folks, or?
I think what's happened is a lot of individual drivers have made friends, and they've created these groups to try to circumvent the enforcement of these violations, because they get together, and like I said, they've become very organized. And we have actually had people from within the group talk with us, show us pictures of my investigators where they've taken pictures of us getting gas or on an impound. Just this last weekend, one of my supervisors came to me and said that they saw a picture of them doing an impound on another driver's phone because they're just doing surveillance on us, just like we're doing on them. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I've got more, but I'll take it offline.
Terry Reynolds, Director for BNI. Let me add one more item that I think is very important here. We're seeing, as you're probably aware, at Reed International Airport, we're seeing passenger traffic that has risen to new levels. We are in some months surpassing what we had in 2019. So we're seeing as much as 500,000+ rides, or not rides, excuse me, passengers deplaning at the airport a week. So that's about, around 2 million a month coming in. So with those kind of numbers, and with the numbers, with the available public transportation we have, it's really hard to meet all the needs of the traveling public. Of course, we are seeing an increase in TNC rides, high gas costs, insurance costs. During the pandemic, we dropped down to probably less than 10,000 active TNC drivers, but now we're up to around 30,000. Same thing with taxis in the area. We have about 3,500 medallions operating, so we see probably 3,000 to 4,000 taxis operating during a given 24-hour period to be able to meet the needs of that. Plus all the shuttles, limos, still are not meeting the demands that we need. So we need every available public transportation now. That's kind of the good news, bad news, but it is good news because we're seeing, obviously, the passenger traffic really come back up. We're seeing the casinos filling up. We're seeing convention businesses coming back. We're probably around 70%, I'm guessing, in our convention business. So during these special events is when you see a lot of the activity. I've talked to Mr. Parks about it, where we see a lot of illegal activity when we have special events, football games, Electric Daisy Carnival, concerts, professional rodeo that comes in. Those types of events will create demand above and beyond the normal demand, and so they prey on trying to go out and give cash rides during that time. So we're trying to gear up to make sure that we have available personnel to do that. But what we also need is to make sure that we have enough public transportation to move people from point A to point B.
Thank you for that. So we have a final question from Senator Danyate.
Thank you so much, Chair Neal. With regards to your comments of what's happening at the airport, I see that personally every Friday and Sunday because I use a TNC company to get home. But I think, as part of the conversations that we're going to have today, and I think this is probably important just for the record, can you explain let's use Uber and Lyft as an example. What does Uber and Lyft actually have to carry versus personal insurance? I think for me, it's probably helpful to understand what does a TNC company have to carry in terms of insurance requirements, because I think that's something that all of us are going to be interested in throughout today's hearing.
Dawn Givens, for the record, with NTA. The company pays for the insurance, and that's why it's really important when you have people that are coming in and they're gypsy drivers, and they may not have insurance. And even if they do have insurance, the insurance may not pay for it if there's an accident. So does that answer your question, or? Go ahead.
Terry Reynolds, for the record. On slide 11, if you look at it, it says passenger in-car providing risk, it's 1.5 million logged into the app. So, for example, if I'm logged into an app and that car is coming to me, okay, I'm not riding it, but that vehicle, that TNC is coming to me, it's covered for 50,000 in case something happens on the way. And then logged into an app en route to pick up 100,000, and then logged into app no ride 25,000. So there's various levels to cover that from the time that the app is called. So when they call, you call for the vehicle, all the way to the time that you get in the vehicle. So it covers the different phases of that, so that when that vehicle by the TNC company is covered during those phases. So those are the various limits of the insurance that's required during the phases of the transportation. Okay. It's kind of confusing, but there's been issues with, for example, you're calling a car, that TNC driver gets in an accident on the way to pick you up, you're still covered during that time period.
Madam Chair, may I clarify? Okay, so I guess the question that the reasoning why I'm phrasing it this way is, so let's say I decide that I need to generate personal income aside from my full-time job, and I decide that I want to become an Uber driver as or I want to register as a partner, as the so-called term that they use. So I want to register as a partner for Uber, and in doing so, I'm going to go and register my car. I'm going to go through their process and so forth, and personally, I already have my personal car insurance, and then the requirements based on what this slide is saying is there are additional coverage that is provided by the TNC, and that's what the limits are. So is there no difference? Is the TNC coverage that is required to pick up in cases that I might not even have insurance? Is that what's happening, or what's the additional coverage or the differential that it occurs? I think that's part of the confusion.
Good questions. Terry Reynolds, Director for BNI, for the record. So you have your regular vehicle insurance, and you're required to carry that, and that does not cover anything to do with the TNC portion of that. So when you register and you become a TNC driver, so let's say you're registered for Uber or Lyft, you're required to, as part of the company policies, you're required to have that coverage insurance covered by the TNC company. And so those are the ones that I just read to you that cover various phases of the delivering the car to you to pick you up, once they drop you off, going to, say, a stationary location, waiting for another person to call you on an app. All those phases are covered under the TNC insurance. Once you go off app, meaning you're no longer working for the TNC company, then you're covered by your personal liability insurance for the vehicle.
Add to that, Senator Donated. One of the problems is, and it's a dangerous situation, is on Friday and Saturday nights, our people come in, enforcement people, have families, kids and all that, and they could take up all these people that are in the arena, at the events, or even at the like at the Caesars or some of those, okay? They could come in and take all these people out, but we don't have the time or the money to get to do that, because we might have 3 people here, 3 people there, and they just, that's about all we can get. Where it's getting very dangerous now. You know, we've heard of, sex trafficking and all that, but there's bad people there, and that's why I guess what I'm saying to you guys is we need help. We need help to keep people safe. And we certainly don't want something to happen to our enforcement people. Sorry.
Terry Reynolds, for the record, it's important to realize that we have very good relationships with Uber and Lyft and the TNC companies, as well as the taxi companies, and we work with them, and they will tell us when there's issues out on the street, where there's somebody working that, and they recognize that. One of the things we don't want to see is the drivers that are basically licensed drivers getting into fights with, and that happens, with illegal gypsy providers. And so we work with those companies and with the drivers to help us out and to spot things so we know where to go. Todd has, like I said, very good relationships with all the companies, and they do work with us, so that's a real plus on that.
So, and then this will be our final question, and we'll move into the Senator Ganser. Do you still have a question? Okay.
Thank you. Again, I just wanted to get the magnitude. I think you said there's 30,000 TNC drivers, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so there's 30,000. Was it 3,000 or 3,500 cabs?
It's a little bit over that, 3,000.
A little over 3,000?
30.
Terry Reynolds, for the record, there's about 3,550 medallions out.
Medallions?
And so a lot of times, especially with lease cabs, you'll have multiple drivers, so they'll take shifts on that. So one cab may be out for 12 to 14 hours with different drivers on that, because they're restricted to the number of hours one single driver can drive on that. But so we see cabs used multiple times because of the lease cabs, which is
Okay.
increasing somewhat.
And then on page 9, where you talk about 40 illegal operators, are those 40 TNC operators or just individuals, or are those cab drivers, or what is the
Todd Park for the.
9, it just
Todd
says
Park
40
for the
illegal
record.
operators? I just want to get some clarification on who those.
Yes, that's,
Oh,
so those are people that, I'm sorry, Todd Park for the record. Those are people that may or may not be on the TNC apps. They may be completely what we call gypsies. They're not working for any network company. Or they could be working for a network company and they've just kind of got into this group away from their time that they normally do Ubers and Lyft rides for some extra cash to be a part of this group. And when I say 40 people, that number is just one group of people. I know that there's another group out there that's working as well. So they may or may not be a TNC driver at this time.
okay.
I hope that answers your question.
That's helpful. I just wanted to understand the magnitude. So we have like 30,000 TNC drivers and another 3,500 medallions, and there's potentially 40 illegal. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that, and thank you for your presentation. I think it gave us food for thought. I probably want to try to lighten the mood before we go deeper, because I always wanted to call you guys Nevada 5-0, kind of like Hawaii 5-0, because that was like the sting operations and the surveillance is pretty serious, pretty deep. But thank you for coming, and we appreciate the presentation so we can critically think about the bill that we're getting ready to hear. So closing the presentation, we will go ahead and open up for SB 125. And I will call the presenters to the table. I will not be presenting the bill. I will have a presenter from NJA. You could just state your name for the record, and then when you're ready to go, let us know. And there is an amendment. I think it came in late on the table. If you didn't have the amendment, please go to the side and pick up the amendment. There will be clarification on the actual amendment that's being presented as well. But if you don't have it, grab it off the table so that you can see that there will be a change to the original bill. Okay, and it's also a Nellis if you're electronically operating from your phone or tablet. All right. Can somebody check to see down south if the button is on? Is the mic still on? Turn that off, please.
It's not on.
Okay, thank you.
There we go.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Neal. Matthew Sharp for the Nevada Justice Association. And I will present to you SB 125. And let me start just with some preliminary comments. The intent of our bill is to recognize the practical reality of what Uber provides. And I'd say really 3 points. First, Uber is the means by which the transportation service is arranged, meaning picking the passenger up and transporting them from one end to the other, whether it's from a hotel to an airport. Uber is the means by which that occurs. Uber is profiting from the transportation service that the driver is providing to the customer. And the driver is acting for the benefit of Uber. Those 3 things under the law are called what's called a common carrier. And basically what a common carrier is if you think of a bus or a limousine, it basically means when you're in the business and you're profiting from transportation services, you have a heightened responsibility to your passengers. You have to be more careful than the average driver. If you think about that, it makes sense. And so that's really, and the reason why it makes sense is that's your profession, that's your business. That's why people come to you. It's like saying when you go to a doctor who provides oncology care, that doctor provides a more heightened level of care than your general practitioner does in providing cancer care. It's just a different business model that one has and the other has. And when you provide a service, we, as a society, expect accountability and responsibility. So that's the concept of the first section, which is section 3C, is to simply recognize that Uber is a common carrier. Now, with that, that's the intent. And we don't always live in perfect worlds, and bill drafts are tricky, and getting lawyers to coordinate with LCB is tricky. So I recognize, as we're discussing today, that there's some vagueness in this language. It's not our intent to make Uber a taxi company, as an example. We don't want to get into that fight, so I recognize within Section 3C, there has to be work that needs to be done. And I have some ideas that I could probably address with some of the opponents to the bill. But I want to make that point. Secondly, the second change that we're looking at is in Section 3D. And what this is basically saying here is it imposes what we call vicarious liability upon Uber. And all vicarious liability means is that when you're directing somebody to provide a service, you're accountable for that person. So if you had somebody come into your house to do some sort of remodel, you can name whatever it is, and in the course of that, the person you hire damages your neighbor's property, you're liable for that. And you can go after the contractor to obtain that money back. And again, it's just simply a form of responsibility. It does, I will acknowledge, vicarious liability does have a context of an employer-employee relationship. Typically, that's what we talk about in vicarious liability. If my employee hurts someone while in the course and scope of their employment, I'm responsible. But it's not exclusive to that. So again, I would say Section 3D is not intending to make some kind of policy pronouncement that an Uber driver is the employee of Uber. That's a different fight. That's not our fight. That's not our issue. Our issue is simply to allow for a form of accountability. Now, also within this, I want to talk about the last phrase. So I want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page as to how this bill would work. If the driver's out waiting for rides, he's got the app on, that's not a situation, he gets in a car accident or she gets in a car accident. That's not vicarious liability under our bill. It's at the point where the ride is accepted by the driver, by the Uber driver. That's when vicarious liability sticks in. The reason for that, there's two reasons, but the first reason is if I'm out driving for Uber, once I accept the ride, my private insurance company no longer covers me. There's an exclusion in your own personal auto policy that you're not covered for hire driving. So if I'm driving down the road, down the strip, I've accepted the ride and I run somebody over, there's no more than the minimum coverage for that person who's been injured. Doesn't seem to make any logical sense that if we then reverse things and as long as I have a passenger in the car, then there's some coverage available for Uber. So it doesn't make any sense. That's why we've expanded that document while providing transportation services to a passenger who is connected to the driver. That's what we're talking about. So then the other issue that I would point out to the committee is we have a system where if you're benefiting from the people who are driving your product or driving for a service, we have a concept of vicarious liability. If you get, for example, if somebody orders a pizza from Pizza Hut and the Pizza Hut driver runs into you, Pizza Hut's responsible. They're receiving the benefit. That's the concept of what we're talking about here. Now, it may come up, and I just want to make sure the committee is aware, generally speaking, there's $1.5 million in coverage for Uber drivers. Separately, there's a $300 million policy that Uber has for itself. So Uber recognizes this very issue that we're talking about. And so we're just codifying this to make sure that people are protected. The people that are injured due to no fault of their own receive some protection and some accountability. That's basically what we're talking about. So I apologize. In terms of the amendment, I apologize. There's a saying when you're a lawyer, give a lawyer a deadline, then you'll get an answer. So unfortunately, when I went back and looked at this today, I don't think that the amendment really satisfies the issues. I think the primary issue as I see it, and as I understand from the other side, that I do think they have a valid point, is the broadness of the 706 language. It's not our intent to impose all of the, requirements that the transportation service presented to us. But I would point this out. As you now stand, Uber essentially does no background check into your drivers. And there have been many, many cases throughout the country of horrible things that Uber drivers have done because of that fact. Rapes, criminal acts. So there is a sense of encouraging accountability when you have vicarious liability, because you have an incentive to make sure the people on the road are safe. That doesn't exist right now. So with that, Senator Neal, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So thank you for that. So before we get into some questions, I want to try to get some clarity for the committee. So in section 2, wasn't there going to be an amendment to section 2 as well in the bill? Removing that strikeout in section 2, sub 3?
Yeah, that should be taken out. That's not part of the,
Okay.
that is true, that is correct.
Okay, so the way I want the questions to go, because you have the amendment, then you're clarifying the amendment. So when the members ask the question based on, if you're gonna ask from section 1, section 2, and section 3, where majority of the issues are in section 3, then speak to the amendment that he needs to clarify, because this amendment is not clean. And so we have to try to get an answer to what's really going to be the policy that is being proposed. And so whoever wants to go first, let me know, because I'm not. Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I was struck by, you said that Uber doesn't do background checks, and I thought, I thought we had that in a bill when we first brought Uber to Nevada. I think it was 2015. That was one of the sticking points, if I remember correctly.
I Senator Spearman, Matthew Sharp from the Nevada Justice Association. I don't recall exactly what those specifics were in the 2015 bill. I can only talk to you about my own personal experience and the personal experience of others within our association regarding some of these more outrageous type cases. Don't believe, and I could be corrected, but I don't believe that Uber subjects its drivers to the same type of investigation that a taxi cab driver would be subjected to under 706.
Senator Duniate.
Thank you so much, Chair. So I think this is important, just to clarify as to, and I'm gonna ask you a clarifying question that is important. So I used to work for Uber, and I was a part of the background check team. So there are background checks that are being performed, and they were pretty stringent. I mean, I think we would have folks that had speeding tickets that were outdated, and we wouldn't even let them pass. So are you saying, for clarification's sake, that based on the members that you are asking, that there are folks that are surpassing the background checks and you're accounting into those issues? Are there certain circumstances that you could describe? Because I think that's important to clarify. Because there is compliance, even from personal experiences, that it is happening. So I just want to make sure that we're understanding you clearly.
And we may be talking two different languages. I think I had said that I acknowledge there's a basic background check, and maybe there's a dispute regarding the reasonableness of that background check. But I can tell you in instances, there have been many where Uber drivers have raped passengers, and they were not picked up as having those type of propensities. So those are the type of things I'm talking about. And that does happen.
Members, any additional? Senator Gansert.
Thank you. You know, I wanted to understand better about how this bill would affect the drivers and being a common carrier. And I mean, you kind of laid out three tenets, I guess, of a common carrier, but I guess I'm asking whether Uber can come or representatives of TNCs can talk about how they think that will affect them as far as being a common carrier.
Matthew Sharp for Nevada Justice Association. Senator Gansert, let me tell you, our intent is to recognize that Uber is a common carrier in the sense of, and I mean this in the common law sense, not in the statutory sense. In the common law sense that since they're in the business of providing a transportation service, the drivers have an added duty, if you will. They have to act with more care in driving than, say, you and I do. That's what the concept of a common carrier is in the common law. I recognize in reading this language that there's confusion. It's not our intent to impose upon either the drivers or Uber all of the provisions in Chapter 706. I recognize that. And so, I mean, that's my answer. If you have further questions, it's certainly not our intent to impose all of the provisions that were being discussed within 706.
Thank you. And so I guess for Madam Chair, how are we going to process this bill? Are we just going to take public comment after this, or how do we create a record of what's understood and not understood?
I'm thinking through that now. So we're still going to take the opposition testimony and the neutral testimony on what is being presented, I guess, as the conceptual amendment based on the proposed amendment that was presented. I'm thinking through how I think what needs to happen right now before I move to opposition and I move to neutral is a clear statement of really what the bill would be doing in the conceptual amendment that you're proposing that is not here right now. Because when people ask and answer or oppose, they need to know what they're opposing.
Fair enough. Senator Neal, Matthew Sharp for the Nevada Justice Association. I would say, as I was thinking of this morning and driving from Reno, with regard to Section 3C, it could say, for example, imposes the duties of a common carrier as provided in the common law, or it could just simply say, imposes the duties of the common carrier and strikes out set forth in Chapter 706 of NRS. But I think that it would make sense, as I'm sitting here in front of the committee, to remove from Section 3C, as it's written right now in the bill, the phrase set forth in Chapter 706 of NRS. Because as I said, it's not, the duty of a common carrier is one imposed by the law. It's not necessarily imposed by statute. There are statutory regulations for common carriers, many of which on their face do not seem to apply to an Uber driver.
Okay, thank you for that. So I don't even know if I should ask a question and make this, I'm gonna blame this on snow days. I don't know what happened in the universe from Monday to today, but clearly the world is upside down in this hearing. So I think what needs to be clarified on the record, though, is did the independent contractor relationship change in the TNC to the driver? I thought we had established them as independent contractors. And I'm asking this question because when we talk about vicarious liability and the expansion of it, are we now saying that vicarious liability is going to now take in the independent contractor and adjust that relationship? Is that what's being anticipated by this language?
Okay, so Senator Neal, Matthew Sharp for the Nevada Justice Association. Two issues. So the question on independent contractors, no, that this bill does not change that. For example, when somebody is just driving, they're not on the app, they're not subject, there's no, it's an independent contractor, no question about that. They're not related to Uber at that point. When they accept the ride, that's when they're under the control of Uber, acting at the benefit of Uber. That's the key aspect. They're acting for the benefit of Uber at that point in time. That's when vicarious liability would attach. Now, vicarious liability is different than, does that make them an employee and all of these other things related to workers' comp, tax issues that are beyond what the civil justice system is dealing with. All we're dealing with is a concept of what's known as principal agent. So at that point in time, when they're acting for the benefit of Uber, that's when the vicarious liability, in our view, should start. And that's why we have the language that we have in Section 3D.
Okay. That's helpful, and it's definitely clearer. So basically, the way I understand it is this, and this is the way that I explained it to other people, is that when you accept the ride, you're going to put the TNC, the way I explained, like the TNC is on the hook, and then vicarious liability will kick in because it is for now the benefit of Uber because this ride was accepted. And then when the app is off, it goes back to their personal commercial insurance. As if an accident was to occur with John riding in the car, heading home, then his personal commercial insurance is what is going to be targeted.
Yeah, Senator Neal, Matt Sharp for the Nevada Justice Association. The only clarification I have, and Senator Donate, did I pronounce that correctly? He might be able to add more specialty because he has more specialized knowledge, but my understanding is the app can still be on. You can be driving, and you're not driving for Uber or for any benefit, but you have the app on. So while the app's on and you're just driving around, I believe that, our bill would have no effect, no vicarious liability. And yes, I believe that the driver's own personal insurance would cover the driver. Once the ride is accepted, that's when everything changes.
Okay, so with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and. Are you gonna muddy it any more? 'Cause I can't take it. Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to be clear, because I looked up the legislation from 2015, and it's AB 175, and sections 30 and 55 actually speak to the requirement to have background checks and prescribe what those checks should be. So when and if Uber comes up, I need to make sure that they're following the law.
I'm not Matthew Sharp for the Nevada Justice Association. I think the issue with the background checks, and I don't have the statute in front of me, is the reasonableness of those background checks, in terms of what's actually being followed. Things happen. It's probably slight on my end to bring that up into this discussion because we're not here to talk about the background checks per se. My point in this debate is to only focus upon the vicarious liability and the common carrier issues.
Go ahead, Senator Gansert.
Thanks. I don't want to muddy this either. Right now there's all sorts of apps. There's an app so you can have somebody walk your dog, you can have somebody house sit, you can rent a house, Airbnb. There's like all sorts of apps to really just put people together for a service. And so I'm not sure how this differs from some of those apps where it's really connecting people for a service and there's a portion of money that goes to whoever who's supporting the app. Because they don't really control that person. They're not in charge of that person. That person is doing work they've decided to do and utilizing an app to connect to get the relationship or the business. So it just seems like this changing language like this may affect a bunch of other platforms and work that people do, entrepreneurial people do independently and choose to do on whatever hours they can choose to do them.
Matthew Sharp from the Nevada Justice Association, Senator Gansert. Our bill only deals with the Uber type apps, but I would distinguish distinguish again that Uber is in control of that driver once the ride's accepted. If you need a ride at your house and I'm the Uber driver and I accept that ride, I'm directed to go to your house and transport you to wherever you've put in the app. So I am under Uber's control under my example for that limited period of time. I completely agree with you in terms of when the app is on and a ride has not been accepted. I agree, Uber's not in control of that driver and they should not be responsible for the negligence of that driver. And under Section 3D, they would not be.
So, thank you for that. I think I'm going to move to opposition, but I strongly feel that God is punishing me right and this is probably going to be a do-over here, but I do feel like I'm being punished. So, oh yeah, let's see. All right, so sorry. I will go to support testimony. But Senator Dunyate has a clarifying question that he wants to ask you. And what I want you to do, I want you to exhale, right? I want you to just really just stop and pause and think. And just because I think there's confusion that is being created, and it's not good. It's not good at all. And I'm one of those very special humans that I tend to say exactly what I'm thinking. And so when Senator Dunyate asked this question, I want it to be as clear as possible in the answer, because there are a lot of TNC drivers who don't understand what the bill was doing when it came out. And this hearing is probably further creating anxiety about what it is doing. And so we need to be crystal clear for all of those TNC drivers who have tuned in. I'm sure it's not all 30,000. It's just going to be the ones who find the time to listen and then tweet out or social media something. But I want clarity for them on what this bill is doing, because there were messages that were sent out and they are not clear on what SB 125 is doing. And so this is the moment to really just make it plain, and then we can move to support, and then opposition can oppose whatever they want, and I will accept my punishment. And I will let Senator Dunyate go ahead and ask his question.
Thank you so much, Chair Neal. Okay, so I'm getting there. I think let's just, I think my question is going to be helpful. So I reflect back into my personal experience when I started working at Uber. This was back in 2015, and et cetera, and I was a part of the operations team. We recognized, this is from personal experience, I don't represent them, I'm not affiliated with them, so I think this is part of my line of questioning. But I distinctly remember that as we were enrolling folks, and many of them probably are still driving to this day, that the broad reality of what Senator Chair Neal was mentioning was that many folks do not actually understand the requirements that enable for you to start doing this, right? In general, it's the same problem that we have with other applications, which is it's a connection service, right? And you anticipate based on your friend connecting you and them enrolling you and saying, hey, this is an ability for you to generate extra income. All you have to do is sign up on the app. You go, you get your vehicle inspected, you start getting rides, right? And sometimes in that process, you might go through the background check and you might go through the registration process, but no one's guiding your hand as to what the tax implications are. No one's telling you that you have to collect 1/3 of your payments that you're going to collect under this application and so forth, and that you have to pay a certain amount of taxes. No one's going through you and educating you as to what the actual requirements are, just to even become an independent contractor. And I think that's part of the confusion that I believe is your intention, which is if you are on, as soon as you turn on the app, right, you are from the partner's perspective, as a driver, right? There are scenarios where you could be driving down Las Vegas Boulevard, and you get the notification saying, "There's a ride for you. Do you accept?" And then, in an instance, it can come off, right? Because that has partnered with someone else, and that's very confusing because how do you identify in those small milliseconds whose personal insurance is covered? And I think that's part of the structure that we were elaborating earlier today. So as I'm trying to figure out the picture of the problem you're trying to solve, I think it's important. And I think this is what Chair Neal was mentioning, which is what are the experiences and the frustrations that you're seeing with the folks that you're interacting with, that your membership interacts with? Because if there are concerns that you feel that community members aren't being supported enough, the common person is not being supported enough, or if partners are finding themselves into these weird cruxes of where policy fails, I think that's important for us to understand. So, what's the initial outcome that you'd like to see?
Senator Matthew Sharp for the Nevada Justice Association. Let me just make one point. This bill is not an attack on Uber as a business. I use Uber. We're not here to attack drivers. What we're trying to do is create a system of responsibility when someone is hurt by the negligence of a driver. And I would argue that what our bill is doing provides more protection for the driver. Because, let me give you an example. If a ride's accepted, and you know more of the details in terms of, when a ride is dropped and all that stuff, and I'm just saying a ride's accepted. The driver is going to pick up that ride. If they get a car accident, they don't have any coverage. Now, that's not in anybody's interest. And at the same time, I think we acknowledge, no matter how the definition is of Uber, that Uber's receiving a benefit when that driver is going to pick up the ride. So it just isn't, so that all we're doing with the vicarious liability primarily is addressing that issue. We're also providing additional protections to the driver, because the driver, as it now stands, I believe, and I may be incorrect, but I believe it's $1.5 million. Well, $1.5 million doesn't go very far if it's a catastrophic car accident and somebody's rendered quadriplegic. Uber has a much bigger policy that would trigger to protect that driver. So we're not here to attack the drivers. What we're trying to do is create a system that's fair, that recognizes that Uber is in the business of profiting from the driver's services. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you for that. All right, so we will go ahead and move to support for SB 125. And we're going to have to make all comments 2 minutes regardless if you come to the table. Is there anyone here in support of SB 125? Is there anyone in Vegas for SB 125? Is there anyone on the BPS on the phone in support of SB 125?
Thank you, Chair Neal. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
I believe you. And so is there anyone in opposition for SB 125 based on the statement that was just made, giving 2 minutes for each person to address their comments? Go ahead, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael Hilderby on behalf of Lyft. On my watch, the proponents had about 30 minutes. I cannot begin to address everything in 2, but I will do my best and be happy to stand for any questions because it sounds like there may be some. I was here and have worked for Lyft and represented them since 2015, so do have some significant history there. I just want to point out a couple of things. In addition to the written testimony we have submitted and the information from the NTA, I want to clarify one or two pieces. The NRS 706A.060 defines transportation services for the purposes of the $1.5 million policy. That starts the moment a driver and rider are matched in the app. It has nothing to do with their physical proximity to one another. That coverage extends until the moment the ride ends and every passenger has exited the vehicle. We are also required under state law to carry additional coverage, as was referenced by the NTA, $50,000 for a single insured, $100,000 for two or more, and a $25,000 property coverage by law anytime the app is on. A driver may have no intention of picking up a passenger. They may have forgotten to turn the app off and be driving home from the convenience store picking up their kid. They're covered if something happens in that period of time by that app. Lyft happens to also provide voluntarily medical insurance, which is a no-fault policy that's available. One of the things that was interesting that came out in the testimony from Mr. Sharp, they acknowledge that the companies do carry substantial liability policies and over and above the minimum coverage we're required under state law of $1.5 million and the additional I just talked about. And they can and do sue TNCs for that exact coverage. I'm still sort of baffled at what problem we're trying to solve. That is there. It may be an extra step that they need to go through to get beyond that 1.5 million, which again is multiples of what some others in the transportation industry and certainly what you and I as individuals are required to carry by law. Let's see, a couple of other things. You heard reference to just over 31,000 drivers currently, TNC drivers currently registered through the NTA by the companies. That represents millions and millions of rides each year. We are now an integral part of the tourism industry of moving people around town. For Lyft, we've given over 600,000 non-emergency medical transport rides since 2019. 65% of our drivers and riders identify as minorities and people of color. We have 13%, I believe, of our drivers are veterans. In terms of the background checks and other issues, those are well defined in NRS 706A.160. They are required at the time of enrollment on the app. That's both the DMV driver record check. Those are required annually after that. The criminal background check and check of the sex offender registry is required at the time of application and a minimum of every 3 years after that. There are a variety of disqualifying offenses listed in that same statute, the requirements that that any driver also maintain the otherwise legally required Nevada minimum insurance on their own cars. Again, I'd be happy to answer questions. I want to also be very clear, you've asked some important questions. Both of the pieces in this bill fundamentally threaten the business model. It is settled law for the last 8 years in this state, as passed by this body, and a system that's working very well, that a different regulatory scheme was appropriate, was approved by this body overwhelmingly, and has been in existence and worked in a stellar fashion ever since then. The industry is not the same as the traditional common carrier industry. It is a different type of relationship. Courts have long acknowledged that as well across the country. And again, I would argue that system has worked very well. I'll stop and be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hillerby. What we'll do, and I don't know if members, I think they do, but I will hear everyone that's sitting right there, and then I'll let them ask questions if they have any questions to each. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, A.J. Delap on behalf of Uber, not to throw a fly in your ointment for the plan, but I have Harry Hartfield who's on Zoom right now who can address these issues, and I would like to bring him up if possible.
Yes.
And I would also like to say thank you for your indulgence with that. The weather got him. He was here since Sunday when the committee rescheduled. He left 10 minutes before this was rescheduled, so we appreciate your understanding of that.
Thank you. Mr. Hartfield. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And like I just said, sorry I couldn't be there for this. I did try, but I spent a few days in Carson City in the snow. I have a longer testimony, but I'll cut some of it short because obviously I think a lot of this is in flux. But I want to start by saying no state in the country regulates TNCs as a common carrier. And there's a reason for that, because if they did, it would substantially change the way we operate our business. I think one thing I'd call out is in Nevada, operators of common carriers are required to be fingerprinted. And law enforcement experts, including Attorney General Eric Holder, have consistently urged against the use of fingerprint background checks because they only capture someone's arrest, not a conviction. And because Black men are arrested but not charged or convicted at such disproportionate levels, communities of color are in turn disproportionately impacted by fingerprint background checks. And there's no evidence that they make the passenger any safer. Under Nevada law, though, all common carriers are required to be fingerprinted. And I'd also, to address what the individual was saying before, is we have a very thorough, rigorous background check that we perform on every single driver. And the NTA, I'm not there, I can't see if they're still there, conducts an audit where they review our drivers to see if they've passed a background check. And drivers who don't pass a background check are immediately removed from the platform or obviously not able to drive in the first place. And that's all written into statute, and that goes through state, local, and federal databases. On the insurance side, I'd also say we have a very thorough regulatory structure that includes background checks, driving history records, vehicle inspections, mandatory insurance policy, a requirement that you obtain a state business license. I'd note Nevada is the only place in the country that requires that, and various vehicle requirements. This bill, even if it was just we were loosely a common carrier, although I'm truthfully not really sure what that would even mean, I don't think that could be done. Even if we were just a loose common carrier, this bill would throw out the entire structure and require the NTA to start from scratch. The new insurance requirements mandated in the law will also cause significant price increases for riders. As is, TNCs are already required to maintain a $1.5 million automobile liability insurance policy anytime a trip has been accepted. And I note that is the highest in the entire country. There are only 2 other states out of 50, along with Nevada, that have $1.5 million insurance requirements. And attorneys can, and I can assure you they do, already claim TNCs are vicariously liable as long as they show that TNCs are directly liable through negligence. This bill essentially just gets rid of the need for proof altogether. So for instance, under this law, if a driver has a fender bender while on a trip and the damages are $4,000, a lawyer could add Uber to the lawsuit, even though the damages are clearly covered by the $1.5 million coverage, which we're required to provide and which we pay for. And I'd also flag that, a recent Wall Street Journal article estimated that 27% of Lyft's revenue goes to cover the cost of insurance. And we actually just informed the NTA that we'd be increasing prices by 5% to cover the increased costs of insurance in Nevada, which are much higher on average than the rest of the country because of the existing requirements. I'll leave it at that and take some questions.
Okay, thank you for that. Next.
Madam Chair, Senators, Morgan Roth for the record, on behalf of Motional. Motional is one of the autonomous vehicle companies that operate here in Nevada. We're proud to have Nevada as our operations home base, where due to the very clear and well thought out AV policy regime, we've dedicated building our state-of-the-art technology from concept to testing and now deployment here. Nevada is home to over 350 Motional employees of Motional at our Las Vegas Technical Center, part of a global team of about 1,500 folks. Because of the regulatory structure and partnerships at various levels of government we have here, it has enabled us to successfully pursue commercial deployment and put the Silver State at the forefront of AV technology innovation. SB 125 would threaten AV technology deployment and advancement. The legislation creates uncertainties within the regulatory structure and proposes unnecessary increases to insurance and liability requirements. These changes would further discourage safe and innovative AV technologies from being deployed here, technologies which have the potential to dramatically improve road safety by reducing roadway accidents and fatalities, and which promote job growth in an emerging industry. We are on track to commence full driverless operations with our TNC partners here in Nevada, which the NTA presented on earlier. And this has only been possible because of the existing regulations that provide us clear guidelines regarding safety, rider protection, liability, and insurance. We have chosen Nevada because of the state's openness to innovation and the right balance of common sense regulatory policies that emphasize safe technologies and job creation. SB 125 would undermine this progress and raise serious concerns for our business moving forward. The bill proposes very dramatic regulatory changes, as Uber just laid out, that we don't see in any other state. And legislating these changes would really put our industry in a serious position. So we respectfully oppose the bill and hope to not see it move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Are there any questions to the opposition? Okay, seeing no questions, thank you. Is there anyone else signed in support? And Carson. Opposition, sorry, opposition. Is,
Madam Chair,
go ahead.
Jesse Wadhams with Black & Wadhams representing the Vegas Chamber and the Nevada Insurance Council. I won't belabor the point. We do oppose the bill, and we'll look forward to working on any amendments.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there anyone down south in opposition? BPS, is there anyone on the phone in opposition?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is still open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there anyone signed in neutral for SB 125 and Carson? Anyone down south? BPS, anyone on the line for SB 125 and neutral?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working, and there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you for that. Would you like to provide a closing comment or no? Probably not. Okay.
Unless somebody has questions, I don't need
No. Thank you for a hearing that's given me deep lessons. We will go ahead and close the hearing on SB 125 and open the hearing on SB 140 and call Senator Hansen to the table.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My feelings are a little hurt. I thought everybody was here to our presentation. I hope Senator Donati is not an expert on Burning Man, so. All right, well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Senator Ira Hansen. I represent District 14, which includes most of Washoe County, a large section of Elko County, Eureka County, all of Humboldt County, Lander County, and today especially Pershing County. With me today is Vice Chairman of the Pershing County Commission, Larry Rackley, on my left, and the Sheriff of Pershing County, Jerry Allen, on my right. Real quickly, this bill is all about basic fairness. Before we get into the details of the bill, the issue here is pretty simple. Pershing County has a population of 5,000 people. It is 6,600 square miles. It has, in addition to that, a population of 1,500 prisoners in the state prison. In other words, there's less than one person per square mile in Pershing County, which used to be the definition of the frontier. So for a brief window of time, roughly July 31st to October 15th, they have a giant event that comes there called Burning Man. I think officially it's Black Rock City LLC. And basically a population the size of the city of Sparks comes there for at least a week to 2 weeks, the bulk of the population. It becomes the 5th largest city in Nevada during that window of time. And what happens is Little Pershing County, with its 5,000 people and its entire budget of about $11 million, ends up paying a disproportionate share of the costs that happen when you have that kind of an event show up in your county. So what the bill actually does is we have in Nevada the live entertainment tax. The portion of the live entertainment tax, I guess I should say, this is Senate Bill 140. Real quick synopsis of it. Right now, you have the live entertainment tax. It applies to events like this that are greater than 15,000 people. It is 9% of the admission fees for the event. And as you'll hear, the admission fees are enormous for this event and have changed substantially through the years. What happens currently is all of the admission fees collected through the live entertainment tax goes to the general fund. The way Pershing County has been able to recoup some of their costs is there was a negotiated agreement back in 2013. I was actually part of that when I was in my sophomore year here in the legislature. That agreement is 10 years old now and is actually coming up for renewal. So at the moment, if Burning Man occurs again in Pershing County, they have literally no opportunity to collect their monies. So what the bill proposes to do is to take that 9% that's collected for the live entertainment tax and give about half of that to the county where the event occurs. Now, I asked the the state tax folks how much that tax is, and I was informed that that is confidential. I could not actually get the amount because they are a nonprofit. We're estimating, though, doing the multipliers on this, that it's in the neighborhood of a little over $2 million. So essentially, the county, to cover its costs at least, would be able to get up to $1 million. So that's the whole purpose of the bill, is to simply modify the current practice of where the tax is, not a new tax, just the distribution of an existing tax to try to help little old Pershing County cover some of their costs. To give you a little bit of the details on it, I thought you might, especially we'll start with Sheriff Allen, if that's okay, Madam Chair, and then Vice Chairman Commissioner Rackley can also give you some of the details of how Burning Man has such a disproportionate impact on the county and its revenues.
Yeah.
Sheriff?
Go ahead.
Not sure I'll need this, but I'll use it anyway. Sheriff Allen, for the record, thank you for letting me come down and testify before you today. So I appreciate that you like to keep things just short and sweet and straight. So the reason I called Senator Hansen to try and get some of this revenue back is basically because this festival, and we focus on Burning Man because it is the largest event in the United States that is permitted on public land, happens in our county. And since the state has imposed this excise tax, this Burning Man used to provide donations to several entities within Pershing County. Our library, our senior center, our school district, those kind of things. As soon as that excise tax came in, they clamped shut, as most companies would, to try and save money. So those costs have now had to be recovered by other budgetary entities through the county's budgeting process, the school district's budget process, those kind of things. But this is a festival that's not going anywhere. If you look at the bill, there's the other counties that are listed, and some of those counties do have the area for this festival to go to, but because of the closeness to the airport, the closest to the hub that is the Washoe County, Carson City area, for most of these people to get to, we think that's where it's going to stay. And so we're just asking that some of the money that we have to expend to go out and provide the services, to provide law enforcement services and any other administrative services through the county, that we get some of those back. Just for reference, right now, when we were in Senator Hansen's office, we looked at what a ticket would cost right now. If you wanted a ticket right now, $628 plus $150 to park your car out there, which Northern Nevada, that's unheard of until this festival came through. If you want a week of unrestricted access to the festival, it's $3,105 plus your $150 parking. Plus the fact that they do bring in a lot of celebrities to this festival. Plug and play camps start at $10,000. You pay your $10,000 and up. That provides you with lodging, food, and wherever you want your camp, and then you just do your thing at the festival, leave everything there, and Burning Man cleans it up and brings it back. And so when we look at what this festival takes a toll on Pershing County, it's out at the very edge of Pershing County. It's actually only about, depending on where they have the city that year, it's only about 8 to 12 miles inside of the county line from Washoe County. So it's at the very edge of our county. We, at least for the sheriff's office, have to go out there, and basically we have to build another sheriff's office out there so that we can function and operate. And under the minute amount of money that we get now with this 2013 settlement agreement, we can't even provide adequate law enforcement. But these monies also have to go for all the administrative costs for the county and those kind of other costs accrued. It's not strictly just for law enforcement. And so my thought process through this whole thing was not to cause a burden. Burning Man, if we increase the cost of Burning Man, they're going to push it off to their participants, and that's just how it's going to work. But I don't want to cause a burden to them. I didn't want to cause a burden to the state, but being as it's in Pershing County, I thought some of that money needs to come back to the county. And don't get me wrong, there's other events in other counties, and so I would like to advocate for those as well, that some of these small counties are really getting overburdened by some of these events that are taking place that we just cannot we cannot handle with the current infrastructure we get financially.
Afternoon. My name is Larry Rackley. I'm a commissioner in Bergen County. And the main thing that I'm after or would like to see changed is we have expenses that the county covers that are not reimbursed. And my way of looking at that is, why should the taxpayer of Pershing County, who more than likely does not attend Burning Man, why should the taxpayer of Pershing County have to pay for an event that happens in our county that they don't take advantage of? It needs to change so we can recover our costs. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. That's our presentation. I will say that Burning Man, I've been watching that event now since it started in the beginning, and it has changed completely. Originally, it was frankly a bunch of older age hippies from the Bay Area who came out there and kind of relived their youth. It's changed into a major, major corporate event where, with, we're talking, when you start doing the math on those ticket prices, you multiply it by 70,000 people purchasing them, you're no longer looking at just a bunch of hippies in vans smoking pot. This is a significant thing. They actually set up an airport out there now. So it's only reasonable that these folks attending this, and actually the people that are making enormous amounts of money in this, at least compensate the little tiny Pershing County. They shouldn't be subsidizing an event that generates at least $50 million. So with that, Madam Chair, we conclude our presentation, and we're delighted to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. Senator Dunyate.
Thank you so much. I promise I am not going to ask any Burning Man questions. That is one of the festivals I have not had the chance to go to yet. But I think the main important question that I had was, it's a big moneymaker. I think all of us understand that. There's a partnership with public lands, and it costs a lot to clean up. And after, no matter the theme of the folks that go, they say, pack and then bring everything back. Obviously, that doesn't always happen, especially when you have tourists from other countries that don't respect our lands, which is fine. But I think the important part that that you had mentioned, and I think for our sake as committee members, is there's obviously a burden that you all as community members are experiencing. Have you quantified what the budget shortfalls could be? I think you mentioned like law enforcement, general accounting services, that you were, before the change, that you were getting those funds from donations, and now because of this change, you don't receive them anymore. So, have you seen what the budget shortfall is? Do you have an estimate of how much that is per year, or what that actually looks like?
Certainly. So,
Your name?
Oh, Jerry Allen. So for some of those, it's hard to quantify because some of those donations are 500, some of them are 1,000. So throughout the county, some of the donated monies that used to be before the tax was put into place is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $8,000 to $10,000. For my perspective, for law enforcement perspective, the first year I took over as sheriff of Pershing County, I went over budget $40,000 just to trying to provide adequate law enforcement to this festival. This was before I had been advised that we had to work within the constraints of a budget. And working in the constraints of that budget, I cannot provide adequate law enforcement to this festival. It is far too large for the resources that we have. So right there, we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000 to $100,000 minimum that we're probably covering other places in the county. So.
And just to clarify, that's specifically for law enforcement. That doesn't include hospital fees for folks who would have been uninsured and got hurt and so forth. So that's just one example that's happening annually, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Senator Ganser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that you have an agreement in place since 2013, and that it's going to be expiring. So what does that agreement look like? How much money are they able to give you through that agreement? Or do they give you?
So through the agreement is based on their population, and their population, Jerry Allen for the record, their population is based on they're paid participants. So in a structured event, of what we have and what we received last year was about $375,000 for the festival plus CPI. I think we worked out about $380,000 to pull off this festival for Pershing County as a whole. That includes law enforcement and indigent funds, administrative funds, anything of that nature.
Thank you. And you don't think that you're going to be able to renew that agreement?
Madam Chair, Ira Hansen again for the record. Now, what's interesting is that the agreement, I've got it in my hands, here's the definition of a peak population. Peak population shall be defined as the maximum population of Black Rock City at any time during the Burning Man event as required by the BLM Special Recreation Permit. That's supposed to be the multiplier that they use. But what Black Rock City has done is they have decided that the peak population is only the paid portion of the people that are there. There's approximately another 20 to 25,000 people there that don't pay the admission fee. Therefore, they're not included in the peak population. But for the sheriff and the county commission, they're included as part of the people that they got to help supervise. So the current event, as determined as the way they have interpreted this, basically, these guys get cheated out of roughly 1/4 of the money that he should be legitimately entitled to, and may have covered some of these costs. One thing the sheriff didn't mention, he probably should, the nurse. You might mention about the...
Oh.
That's actually kind of important to understand, an additional thing that the county provides for protection. I'm sorry, Sheriff, go ahead.
So to answer your primary question, Jerry Allen, sorry. So to answer your primary question, yes, we are going to renegotiate this contract. However, that will be done through the attorneys and legal wranglings of the county. My thought process is, yes, we're going to come to an agreement. What that will be, I don't know, and how long that will take, I don't know. As far as what Ira had alluded to, so for this festival, we bring out law enforcement. Like I said, we have to basically build an entire substation out there, so we have to provide housing for our staff, our deputies. We've purchased a building over the last few years, a portable office building. We've turned that into a temporary jail facility, holding facility. So we have been able to make some things happen. In the last few years, we have had a sexual assault nurse on staff to try to provide a better service to the victims and survivors of sexual assault at the festival. We have that on staff there in Gerlach, ready to go, just to provide a service that is much faster than getting into Reno and further traumatizing them after they've had such a heinous act performed on them. So that is another service that is covered in this agreement that is quite substantial, that is not one of the normal things that we would do in our normal course of business.
Any additional questions? So I guess the question that I have, well, I have two. Number one, why not just codify the agreement in statute and then, so at least you have the peak population definition that you want in statute, so that there is no going back and forth. I understand, like 10 years ago, Burning Man was like this new thing, and we were like, oh, we don't really want to hurt anyone, and let's just bring it forward. But now you know what it is, right? So you don't have to play. You just statutorily determine what you would like to see for yourselves. Wondering if you consider that. And the second question I have, that instead of doing the percentage, why not just take, just a certain amount of money, a flat amount, off the LET at the beginning of the year and just do a sweep for like $1 million off the top of the revenue?
Okay. Jerry Allen for the record. So those are very good questions. And the first question comes back to the history of how this settlement agreement came about. The history is written into the settlement agreement. We can provide that to members of this committee if that's what you would like. This came about because for quite a while, the Board of Commissioners did not enforce the NRS for the festival tax. When we tried to enforce that, because we were statutorily required to, and there was no exemption written into the law for the festival ordinance, Pershing County tried to enforce that. Burning Man sued us. We lost that. That's how we got to this settlement agreement. So to answer your question, so that's how that came about on this. To answer your other question, I would love to have it statutorily put in there as to what the peak population is, because my opinion is everybody that's out there is part of the population of that city. Vendors contracted, just like any other city, Carson City, Reno, Lovelock, where I'm from. Everybody that lives and works there is a citizen there, they're a resident there, they're under that population. I mean, we have 1,600 inmates in our correctional facility that are not permanent residents there, but they're still counted as part of our population. So my opinion would be that, yes, everybody that works there is included in that population. However, that's another legal wrangling that's been done outside of my purview, and so that would have to be wrangled back in so that we can get to that. As far as your second question is to taking off the top, I'm not sure.
Just do a flat amount versus a percentage.
Right, and we have tried that personally. Pershing County just lacks the legal resources to be able to outwrangle Burning Man to make that happen. So we absolutely need the state's assistance on those types of things.
So, just a quick follow-up, because I'm super curious and I definitely want to see the agreement. What was the basis of the suit? What did they sue you on exactly for the festival tax?
Because for years Pershing County, So for years, Pershing County as a county did not enforce the festival ordinance that was in statute. And when it's in the history of the district attorney sued the Board of County Commissioners, telling them that they had to enforce that statute because there was no exemption that they were allowing for. When they did that, Burning Man sued us in federal court, and that is how, to get it all to be settled, that's how this agreement came about. And it's written into the agreement.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could answer that a little bit too. Ira Hansen. The reason I didn't include the whole comprehensive agreement, honestly, doesn't have anything to do with the bill itself. It would kind of cloud the whole issue. This is an agreement that they had previously. The concept of the bill is frankly just to streamline the whole process, make it very simple. There, you have a live entertainment tax. It is definitely based on a population curve, so you would, his responsibilities is going to increase or decrease based on population. The live entertainment tax is based on a per head tax, basically. So it was a very quick, easy fix. I will provide a copy of the complete agreement, but the reason I didn't want to throw it in the mix initially is because it would actually kind of almost cloud we're trying to basically simply redirect an existing tax so that the county gets a little more of it rather than trying to come up with some other ideas. However, just so you know, I think your idea is excellent. We're going to come up with a flat fee or something like that. I also think there's, on the part of the county, when they had a little disturbing about how they have to come and almost grovel before Burning Man and act like, well, can you at least pay us the bare minimum of our cost? What happened to the idea of a big giant festival like this actually helping the people who live in the county pay for some of the other services as well? We're in a county where they have really one main industry, Core Rochester Mine, and the second biggest industry is the state prison. So if you have a $50 million plus festival that shows up, I don't see anything wrong with these guys getting at least a little bit more than their bare minimum costs for providing these services. Since when do we look at tax revenue as like, okay, you got to have the absolute minimum to do the basic services, and anything that might be in addition to that may benefit your city for swimming pools, libraries, senior citizen centers. You don't get any of that. We want to make sure Burning Man gets the maximum possible dollars kept, irrespective of the harm that it ultimately does to the people living in the county. So to me, I don't see any, I'm just talking to both these gentlemen and the county overall, I almost have an irritated feeling like they're sitting there groveling before this giant corporation that shows up in their county for a few weeks and then threatens to sue them if they dare try to take a little bit of additional revenue to pay some of the needed services in their own county. So just wanted to throw that out there too. So not against the idea of a flat fee or anything like that. I did want to give you kind of the idea of where it came from, is to try to keep it simple. But yeah, I think Burning Man, for its impact to this county, is currently getting away with financial, I don't want to say murder, but financially they're making out like bandits compared to what they're paying, compared to the services and the impact it has to the citizens of Pershing County.
I understand. Senator Buck?
Thank you, Chair Neal. You had mentioned that Burning Man is a nonprofit. Is that true?
Correct. My understanding, it's a I don't know the exact, 501c3 or whatever it is, but yes, it is officially considered a nonprofit. Ira Hansen for the record. I'm sorry, for the record, it is a 501c3 nonprofit corporation.
So thank you for the presentation on this bill. It's a compelling argument, and so we will open up for anyone that is here in support of SB 140.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Is there anyone here in support in Carson City for SB 140? Is there anyone on the BPS on the phone for SB 140 in support?
Thank you, Chair. Your public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Okay, I don't see anyone in Vegas. So I will go ahead and move to opposition. Is there anyone here in opposition of SB 140 in Carson City? Okay, BPS, is there anyone on the phone in opposition?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. The public line is open and working, and there are no callers at this time.
Okay. I don't see anyone in Vegas. Is there anyone in neutral on SB 140 in Carson City? Is there anyone on the phone, BPS, in neutral for SB 140?
Thank you, Chair. Your public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, so any closing comments on SB 140?
Just to once again say thank you very much for the hearing today.
You're welcome. All right, so we will go ahead and close the hearing on SB 140 and open up for public comment. Is there anyone here for public comment for Senate revenue? Okay. So is there anyone on the phone for public comment? BPS?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The public line is still open and working. However, we have no callers at this time.
Okay, thank you. So we will go ahead and adjourn Senate revenue and see everyone next week.